Great. Well then, good evening. I'm Stan Gerson, Dean of the School of Medicine, and I'm just delighted to have us all join together to celebrate the appointments of Joseph Sabik, MD, as the chairholder of the Oliver H. Payne Professorship in Surgery, and Robert Salata, MD, for his appointment as the chairholder of the John H. Hord Professorship in Medicine. And I want to extend a special welcome to the families of Dr. Sabik and Salata and their extensive families who've come here to help us celebrate, and members of the Blossom family who helped to establish the Oliver Payne Chair years ago, and to welcome esteemed colleagues, President Eric Kaler, who will give the closing remarks, and Karen Kaler, and Tom Zenti, past CEO of University Hospitals, Tom Halevic, CEO of Cleveland Clinic, as well as Jeff Ponsky, now emeritus professor, who helped endow a chair that we'll celebrate later this fall, and Ro Green, who is here with us as a member of the University Board of Trustees. And in a few minutes, I will introduce Cliff McGarrion, who is the CEO of University Hospitals. Since there are many members of the Department of Medicine and the Harrington Heart and Vascular Institute in attendance, I thought it was appropriate that we observe a brief moment of silence commemorating the passing just this past week of a dear emeritus professor and colleague of this school and of the university, Dr. Alfred Waldo. There are few moments that a dean gets to cherish more than to celebrate the establishment and then the appointment of our endowed professorship holders. They really do honor our best and brightest faculty from all of our activities across the School of Medicine. They help us retain that special designation of individuals that we would like to spend their careers with us. And they really do champion and cherish the accomplishments of our best and our most accomplished. Now, the concept of professorships is quite special. It dates back in academic institutions many, many centuries. The oldest on record that I could find is early in the Renaissance, when King Henry VIII in 1540 founded the Regius Chair in Civil Law at Oxford University. And I'll remind our dear hospital leadership that, as it turns out, our universities hang in there a lot longer than our hospitals do. So you guys have some work to do to hang around to catch up to 1540. The oldest in the United States, because it's the oldest university, is Harvard's Hollis Professorship in Mathematics and Natural Philosophy. It was established in 1721 in the Divinity School, now is a part of the Department of Physics. And like many professorships, the Hollis Chair went for many generations and evolved over time. It's now held by a woman, Karen King. It's probably not likely that Dr. Hollis ever imagined that a woman would hold his chair. Thank goodness that's happened. The oldest chair we have here at this university and in the School of Medicine is the Leonard C. Hanna Professorship, established in 1901 through a gift of the Howard Hanna in honor of his father. Next came the Henry Wilson Payne Professorship in Anatomy in 1903, which was a gift in honor of him by the Howard Hanna family. And of course, Henry Wilson Payne is the father of Oliver H. Payne, whom I'll mention in a second. Then the third was the Hanna Payne Professorship in Experimental Medicine, again recognizing the accomplishments of that family. In 1932, relevant to today, Elizabeth Bingham Blossom made a gift to Case, Western Reserve University, to establish a professorship in honor of her uncle, Oliver Payne, which we celebrate today. Elizabeth was a sister, this is going to get on, guys, so just watch this, was a sister of Francis Payne, you'll notice the name, Bolton, another famous name in the school and the city, namesake of our School of Nursing, and the great-grandmother of David Blossom, School of Medicine class of 2000 alumnus. Elizabeth was the heir of the Oliver Payne fortune, which came with the co-founding of Standard Oil, and the Blossom family, of course, has supported the Cleveland Orchestra and provided the funds to establish the Blossom Music Festival and Music Center. And I'm delighted that David and Marie Blossom are representing the Blossom family here with us this evening. So when I realized that I was going to get myself into trouble if I didn't have my facts straight, I went to my bookshelf, and above my home computer is, in fact, the book Titans by Ron Kirchow, came out a little over a decade ago. So I went back up and I looked up Oliver Payne, and I found that there were 23 references and about 8 pages devoted to him. So Oliver was the son of Henry Wilson Payne, who was a U.S. senator. A lot of mishigas happened around his senatorial reappointments and re-elections in the state of Ohio. And it turns out that Oliver Payne was very active with Standard Oil. So Oliver started out working with John Huntington, and they developed the first oil refineries here in Ohio, which was of interest to John D. Rockefeller. And as a result, Oliver was taken out by John, and they became part owners of Standard Oil of Ohio. I'll note, just to close the loop, that John D. Rockefeller's son David established Rockefeller University, and he and his friend Reg Coombe were co-chairs of Memorial Hospital. And when Eric Kaler and I visited Paul Shiverick at his wonderful redone house in Palm Beach, there was a picture of David Rockefeller and Reg Coombe, which helped me understand that Reg Coombe's daughter was Patricia Shiverick. I hold the Azen Patricia Shiverick chair, and I'm glad to see that Dr. Ponsky shook his head, because just to his house's right, down the hill on Fairmount, is the Shiverick land, which was just donated to the Conservancy. David Shiverick, Paul's twin brother, will be with us on Saturday for the Five-Star Sensation, because he's a vintner, and will be bringing his wine collection in from Los Angeles. So we're not quite done. So in 1972, Helen Chisholm Hord had an estate gift to the university and the School of Medicine to establish a professorship for her late husband, John Huntington Hord, who had died in 1949. John's grandfather, I'll bring back the name John Huntington, had immigrated to Cleveland in '54. He joined with Clark and Payne to develop that oil refinery. I mentioned that Oliver Payne then sold it off to Rockefeller. And John Harrington decided to stay out of that mess, and he owned the ships. So the ships transporting the oil across Lake Erie were owned by Huntington, and then Junior and then grandson became John Hord, who was a trustee of the Museum of Art, and therefore a descendant of the Standard Oil Collective. And they're all, if you want to go visit their graves, at Lakeview Cemetery. All right, so now you know the background of these chairs. It doesn't get more complicated than that, but I think it also respects the fact that our university and our school have had a prominent role in the city and have been recognized by its founders and its benefactors for generations, and we're delighted to have that ability to be here and celebrate. So the Hord Endowment has now supports 2 chairs, the School of Medicine chair, traditionally at university hospitals, and the School of Medicine chair of pharmacology, while the Oliver Payne Professorship recognizes the chair of surgery. And I will point out to both Dr. Sabik and Salata that it respects and reflects their position as the academic chair leader for the School of Medicine. We have more than 125 professorships. As I've mentioned, we have benefited greatly from the university's efforts, and all of them help us navigate our mission to improve global health by linking populations in research in a superb educational environment across our 5 locations, our 4 hospitals, and the school itself, with over 3,400 full-time faculty. So I would love to provide my comments to Joe and, or about Joe and Bob, but I really have to turn that over to Dr. Cliff McGarrian, CEO of University Hospitals Health Systems, who will then in turn introduce Dan Simon. And as I mentioned, President Kaler will join us to bestow the chairs at the end of our evening. Cliff McGarrian should be well known to all of us as Chief Executive Officer and holds the Jane and Henry Meyer Chief Executive Officer Distinguished Chair and is professor in the Department of Otolaryngology of the School of Medicine. He was appointed UHHS President and CEO in 2019 and led us through, as did Tom Mihalovic, frankly, an incredible effort on the hospital's parts through the pandemic. We think of it now in the rearview mirror, but all of us who went through it prospectively know how heart-wrenching it was to navigate those efforts. Within the Department of Otolaryngology, he was chair from 2012 to 2018, and at that time held the Julius McCall Professorship at Case, as well as the Richard and Patricia Pogue Endowed Chair UH in auditory surgery and hearing. His clinical expertise, and guess what, I know it firsthand, is in hearing loss, chronic ear infections, and sinusitis, vertigo, and the like. And he helped found the very successful UH cochlear implant program. He's received numerous awards as CEO, helped the institution attain the 2022 AHA Quest for Quality Prize, which is a remarkable achievement. So without even further ado, I introduce Dr. McGarrian.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Dean Gerson. It's a really big deal. It's a big honor to be here, and I think what's important to me is to recognize and remember that for nearly 125 years, our institutions really have been connected, and probably the most emblematic example of our shared commitment to excellence as it relates to clinical activity, teaching, research, has been these endowed professorships that sit at the medical school, but celebrate and support a significant, iconic clinical leader at university hospitals. And as you heard from Dean Gerson, this goes way, way back. So it's really an important moment that we're celebrating what's happening today. The 2 chairs that we're celebrating, specifically the Payne chair and the Hord chair, and chairs like it, have really been wrapped around the clinical leaders of surgery and medicine dating back nearly, as you heard, 125 years. And it is probably the most important chair there is, in the sense that it really unites university hospitals and Case, as we have been, and it is respected at the highest level, these university professorships, really on both sides of the Adelbert Road. And if you think historically of our chairs of surgery, for example, who have been similarly awarded, if you will, this distinction of a university professorship of this level, they date back to Dudley Allen, the Dudley Allen Memorial Library, and then after him, George Cryle, who went on after his retirement to found the Great Cleveland Clinic. Following him, Elliot Cutler, who was Harvey Cushing's right-hand man, if you will, at the Brigham. And then most recently, iconic, beloved leaders like Dr. Jeffrey Ponsky, who held the Oliver Payne chair. Similarly, in medicine, the leaders of medicine at university hospitals have also been, if you will, lucky enough to hold these university professorships, and notably Robert Ebert, who, those who don't know, was chairman of medicine, left to go to Harvard to be the chair of medicine, and quickly became a very well-respected dean of Harvard Medical School. Adel Mahmoud, who, as you know, was here similarly as the chair of medicine, and went on to, after his retirement, lead Merck in the vaccine, be CEO of Merck Vaccines. And then most recently, Rick Walsh. And now we have the two, if you will, who are going to be stepping into these shoes. And they're big shoes to fill, but there's no one really better than Dr. Joseph Sabik and Dr. Robert Salata to accept this honor and carry this torch forward, which really emblemizes the unbelievable relationship between our two organizations. I have to give tremendous thanks, if you will, to Dean Gerson, as well as President Eric Kaler, and before Eric, the interim president, Scott Cowan, who felt very, very strongly that these professorships are maintained, and we honor the history and propel both of us forward. I'd love to introduce Joe Sabik and Bob Salata, but these honors would really best be handled by Dr. Dan Simon. Dr. Dan Simon is the president of Academic and External Affairs and is also the chief scientific officer for University Hospital Health System. Dan is a professor of medicine and also senior associate dean for academic affairs at Case Western Reserve University. As president of Academic and External Affairs and chief scientific officer, Dr. Simon leads the system's strategy and performance really across the entire spectrum of research activity, including basic, translational, clinical, and even health service outcomes in population health. He oversees our graduate medical education program and has primary responsibility for academic affiliations, including, obviously, our principal relationship with Case Western Reserve University, but also now Oxford University, NeoMed, and Technion, the Israel Institute of Technology. Dr. Simon is also charged with elevating the system's performance in medical education and discovery really to the highest levels, and driving also our strategic philanthropy, which oftentimes is built around the issues of education and research. Additionally, and it's a big job, but if you knew Dan, he can do it. He can do it almost anything. He oversees the Harrington Discovery Institute at University Hospitals, part of the Harrington Project for Discovery and Development, and it really has executive leadership in this area, also community impact, diversity, equity. So to help link many in the audiences to the backgrounds, we heard an unbelievable, I think, summary by Dean Gerson about the origin of the chairs, and I'm so grateful to have the families here today, but also those in the audience. And what is interesting is both Dan Simon, Dr. Tom Mihalovic, and Joe Sabik share their time in specialty training at the Brigham and Women's Hospital at Harvard before they all migrated, not in one bus or one cab, but they came fairly close in time to Cleveland, and clearly they're leading. So it's an honor really to have you here, and it's also personally an honor to have one of our longest tenured CEOs, who is also a mentor and a friend to me, Tom Zenny. You helped, if you will, make sure that the environment was right for Dr. Salata and Dr. Sabik to be successful. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Dan Simon.
It is a pleasure to welcome you here this evening for this special investiture ceremony for the Oliver H. Payne Professorship in Surgery and the John H. Hord Professorship in Medicine at Case Western Reserve University School of Medicine. It is truly an honor and a privilege to participate with Dean Gerson in acknowledging the accomplishments of two illustrious physicians and renowned academic leaders, Dr. Joseph Sabik and Dr. Robert Salata. Joseph F. Sabik III is the Oliver H. Payne Professor and Chair of the Department of Surgery at Case Western Reserve University and University Hospitals Cleveland Medical Center, and the Surgeon-in-Chief and Vice President of Surgical Operations for the University Hospitals Health System. A Massachusetts native, Dr. Sabik earned a BS in Life Sciences from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology and received his MD degree from Harvard Medical School. I first met Joe in 1983 when we were classmates and roommates at Harvard Medical School. Thus, having known Joe now for almost 40 years, I feel that I can provide an accurate assessment of his qualifications for you today. He completed his surgical internship and residency at Massachusetts General Hospital and thoracic and cardiovascular surgery residency at the Cleveland Clinic. Joe and I had a wonderful time together in Boston. And this is a picture, and you might be asking, who's Hulk Hogan? And that was an apartment drinking game, and I don't exactly know the rules. I love this picture because this really was the time we found out that Joe was moving to Cleveland for his heart surgery fellowship. And little can we surprise ourselves now that only a few years later, in 2006, I think I put my hand on my own head and said, I can't believe I'm moving to Cleveland. In 1986, he was appointed to the Cleveland Clinic Department of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery as a staff physician, and in 2008 was named the chair of the Department of Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery. During his tenure as chair, he held the Sheikh bin Rashid Al Maktoum Distinguished Chair in Thoracic and Cardiovascular Surgery and was a professor of surgery at the Cleveland Clinic Lerner College of Medicine. In about 2016, at the time I was president of UH Cleveland Medical Center, I recruited Dr. Sabik along with Dr. Megarian to be the chair of surgery at University Hospitals in Case Western, joining the pantheon of exceptional heart surgeons ascending to department chairmanships, including David Sabiston at Duke, and of course his MGH mentor and native of Akron, Ohio, Dr. Gerald Austin. In 2021, he was awarded this Oliver Payne Professorship in Surgery. Dr. Sabik is widely published in leading professional journals, including the New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, and many others, and is the author of many textbook chapters on cardiac surgery. He is a frequent lecturer at national and international conferences, and his specialty interests include adult cardiac surgery for valvular heart disease, coronary artery disease, and less invasive cardiac surgery. Dr. Sabik is a fellow of the American College of Surgeons and the American College of Cardiology, and is a member of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons, the American Association for Thoracic Surgery, and the Massachusetts General Hospital Alumni Society. He has served on the program committees for these societies, and he has been a membership chair for the American Association for Thoracic Surgery and is a member of the board of directors of the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. He is currently the second vice president of the STS and will assume the presidency of this most prestigious surgical society in 2025. Dr. Sabik has excelled in the implementation of multiple innovative surgical techniques, from minimally invasive heart surgery to all arterial coronary revascularization, that have decreased suffering and improved the quality of life of thousands of patients. He is demonstrating outstanding contributions in both teaching and research, publishing more than 271 peer-reviewed manuscripts. Joe is a Pied Piper in recruiting the next generation of division chief leaders. There have been many, but of course, as a cardiologist, I have to point out the recruitment of Dr. Mark Pelletier from my own old hospital, the Brigham and Women's Hospital, to lead UH's cardiac surgery program that now performs surgery at 6 different hospitals with 11 cardiac surgeons, 16 perfusionists, and 16 first assists. A truly amazing team. And I'm sure that Larry Cohen won't be happy when I say this, but this is the best team that I have worked with during my 30-plus cardiology career in both Boston and Cleveland. He is an outstanding technical surgeon and is adored by his patients, achieving 5-star status on both health grades and rate MDs, and he has been voted as one of Cleveland's top doctors for more than 20 years. On a personal note, Dr. Sabik exemplifies the values and character of the new generation of heart surgeons: calm, collaborative, curious, and above all else, humble. We are honored to have him as a colleague, and I hope that you will join me in welcoming Dr. Sabik and his family. Alan, I was there for the first date. Son Joe and sister Carol, who are here tonight. I would especially like to call out his amazing wife, Dr. Ellen Sabik. Joe and I have one very important thing in common. We both married cardiologists who are smarter and more talented than us. Endowed positions represent prestige, leadership, and great responsibility. These perpetual funds enhance clinical discovery and medical education, both of which are essential to the future of medicine. I can think of no one more deserving of this honor as the investiture, as the Oliver Payne Chair, than Dr. Sabik. Joe, your work as a cardiac surgeon is saving lives. We applaud your dedication and are thrilled to celebrate this career milestone with you.
President Kaler, Dean Gerson, Dan Simon, Dr. Megarian, colleagues and friends. I am very honored to receive the Oliver H. Payne Professorship of Surgery at Case Western Reserve University of Medicine. I would like to thank Dr. Simon for the nomination and kind introduction, and Dean Gerson for bestowing upon me this professorship. I am very proud to be the 6th recipient of this professorship, following Drs. Lenhart, Holden, Schuck, Shulak, and Ponsky, all previous chairs of the Department of Surgery at University Hospitals and Case Western Reserve. It is also an honor to share the stage today with Dr. Robert Salata. He is what I would call the chair's chair. Dr. Salata is an exceptional leader, researcher, educator, and physician. He has been a wonderful friend and colleague over the past 7 years, and I cannot think of anyone more deserving than him to receive the John H. Hord Professorship of Medicine. Congratulations, Bob. As a chair recipient, I've been asked to discuss my career path. But before I do this, I would like to honor and share a bit about the life of the namesake of this chair, Oliver H. Payne. Oliver Hazard Payne was born to a wealthy family in Cleveland in 1839 and died an extremely wealthy man in New York in 1917. Following the advice of his childhood friend, John D. Rockefeller, he invested heavily in iron and oil and acquired significant shares in U.S. Steel and Standard Oil. His fortune grew, and according to the American Heritage magazine, he was one of the 40th wealthiest Americans of all time, actually number 26. A philanthropist, he founded and endowed the Cornell Medical School. In 1932, his niece, Mrs. Elizabeth Bigham Blossom endowed the Oliver H. Payne Chair of Surgery at the Western Reserve University School of Medicine in his honor. I suppose bringing us all here today. As I reflected on my career in preparation for this ceremony, it became clear to me that I've gotten to this point thanks to the assistance, advice, and guidance of many excellent mentors, sponsors, and friends. I would like to use my time to discuss why their mentorship, sponsorship, and friendship have resulted in my being here today. I cannot tell you how happy I am to have several of them here with us this afternoon. I grew up in Fall River, Massachusetts, a city largely of immigrants who settled there to work in one of the many mills. I attended a very large public high school, where nearly half of the 1,100 students in my sophomore class dropped out of school at 16 to go work in the mills. I was fortunate to have a family that valued education and always encouraged me and my siblings to succeed academically. We also had many wonderful teachers. One specifically stood out. Mr. Dubois' enthusiasm for biology and ecology was infectious. He mentored a group of us in the ecology club. During the summer months, he taught us how to map the terrain around our reservoir and learn how important wildlife and plant life were in maintaining our ecosystem. During the school year, he taught us how to evaluate the pollution in our rivers and airs. Under his mentorship, we would voluntarily write and submit reports of our findings to the Environmental Protection Agency. One of these reports resulted in a trip to the White House to meet President Carter and receive a presidential citation. Because my last name begins with S, I am usually at the end of most alphabetically arranged lines, and that day in the White House Cabinet Room was no different. We were arranged alphabetically, and I was at the end of the line. As we waited, the president's usher walked into the room and over towards me. He told me where the president would enter and suggested I look that way. The usher opened the door, the president caught my stare, and walked right up to me and began talking. In all honesty, I do not remember much of what he said to me, except that we talked about pollution. At 17, I was a little overwhelmed. The day continued with lunch with our congresswoman in the congressional dining room, a trip to the Attorney General's office, an afternoon at the Smithsonian, and a flight home later that evening. As you can imagine, having the president and other leaders appreciate and value our work made an incredible impression on me. I learned that doing something I enjoyed, scientific investigation and research, I could make a difference. None of this would have been possible without the mentorship of Mr. Dubois. My love of science and math and a lecture my father brought me to on artificial limbs by Professor Mann at MIT drew me to attend MIT. I was excited about the opportunity to use science and math to help others. Interested in biology research, I arranged a meeting with the biology advisor for undergraduate research at MIT, Dr. Hausman. In the beginning, I thought the meeting was going well. However, in the middle of the meeting, Dr. Hausman seemingly stopped paying attention to me. He picked up his phone and made a call. This was before cell phones, by the way. After he finished the call, he got up and asked me to follow him. We walked over to the Cancer Center, where we entered an ongoing meeting with Drs. Salvador Luria, David Baltimore, and Phil Sharp. I was stunned. Both Drs. Luria and Baltimore were Nobel Prize recipients, and we all knew that Dr. Sharp would receive, and he did, a Nobel Prize someday. My glazed look clearly illustrated my shock and awe at seeing three great scientists up close in person. To break the ice, Dr. Baltimore poked Dr. Luria in the shoulder and asked, "Are you the real Dr. Luria?" Dr. Luria was a legend at MIT. He rode his bicycle to Marseille to avoid capture when the Germans invaded France in World War II. He was one of the original bacterial geneticists at Cold Springs Harbor. His postgraduate student was Watson, the co-discoverer of the structure of DNA. In short, we idolized him. Every few years, Dr. Luria would take one undergraduate to have in his lab, and unknown to me, I was about to interview for that position. For the next hour, we talked, and for the next 3 years, I was the undergraduate student in his lab. During my first summer working, I felt I discovered a bacterial gene that had not been previously described. He was doubtful at first and pushed me to do more experiments to be sure. I did, and this discovery led to my first academic publication in a scientific journal. I've always enjoyed working with my hands and built a lot of the equipment in the lab that I needed to conduct my experiments. Dr. Luria was very amazed by my ability to build things, and he would repeatedly tell me I should become a surgeon. His advice likely influenced my decision. I cannot speak enough of his patience, kindness, and willingness to spend time and educate me, an undergraduate student, on basic science research. He nominated me for several awards, some of which I won. He wrote my parents' letters on my accomplishments and strongly supported my application to medical school. I will always be indebted to him for his support, guidance, and for the opportunity to experience the excitement of scientific discovery. After college, I attended Harvard Medical School. Here, I met the most important person in my life, my wife, Ellen. By the way, I also was classmates with Dan Simon, if you didn't know. During my time at HMS, I had my first exposure to heart surgery. I worked in the large animal lab of Dr. Lawrence Cohn. Here I learned how to run the heart-lung machine, place animals on and off cardiopulmonary bypass, implant heart valves, and care for animals postoperatively. I also had the opportunity to watch Dr. Cohn operate. He was a master technical surgeon. He made heart surgery look easy. He was technically perfect. He was efficient and never hurried. These experiences really developed my desire to become a surgeon, particularly a heart surgeon. I enjoyed the complexity of the operations and was excited to learn the technical skills necessary to be a surgeon. In other words, the die was cast and there was no turning back. After medical school, I did my general surgery residency at the Massachusetts General Hospital. At the MGH, I worked and learned from incredible surgeons, including Doug Mathieson, a thoracic surgeon and later close mentor and sponsor. Knowing I was interested in becoming a heart surgery, Dr. Mathieson advised me to consider doing my cardiothoracic surgery at the Cleveland Clinic. Having grown up, attended college, medical school, and now doing my surgical residency in Massachusetts, I had no intention of leaving or moving to Cleveland. Despite my letting him know I was not interested, he reached out to Dr. Cosgrove on my behalf, and Dr. Cosgrove reached out to me personally and invited me to spend a day with him. For a young surgeon wanting to be a cardiothoracic surgeon, being at the Cleveland Clinic was like being a kid in a candy store. The incredible volume, variety, and quality of heart surgery being performed was unlike anywhere else. I truly enjoyed being a resident, having the opportunity to learn from master surgeons such as Toby Cosgrove, Bruce Lytle, Fred Loop, and Paul Taylor. They were all excellent teachers and mentors. However, I worked the closest with Dr. Bruce Lytle. Dr. Lytle always had time for the residents and took an interest in not only their education, but also in them as people. As a resident and later staff, Dr. Lytle educated, mentored, and sponsored me during my career. He has many sayings, but these are some that I'd like to share with you because they've stuck with me. It's not good enough to be good. You want to be the best. Don't let how others mistreat you get in the way of your getting what you want. You have spent your life learning to be a heart surgeon. Why rush your operations? The hours you spend with the patient in the operating room are the most important hours in the rest of that patient's life. And I suppose my favorite, I've done a few dumb things in my life too. His sayings would always help me when I reflected on what I wanted to do or when things did not always go as planned. His love of heart surgery and helping those who others could not was inspirational. He always put the patient first. He is the type of surgeon I aspired to become. To become a better surgical researcher, I took classes on statistics and outcomes research. But if it were not for Dr. Eugene Blackstone, I would not have accomplished nearly as much as we did together. Dr. Blackstone is a trained cardiothoracic surgeon, but has devoted much of his career to outcomes research and has developed many statistical methods, including ones to analyze long-term outcomes. Gene was not shy about his demand that if we were going to do research together, it would be nothing less than excellent research. He would say, you do quality surgery and we do quality research. His demand for excellence, might I say perfection, is well known. He unselfishly worked with me, taught me his methods, gave me access to his statistical programs, institutional computers, and databases, and line by line improved the papers I wrote. His enthusiasm for discovery was infectious, and this inspired me to work harder. The reward of research is discovery, but I must admit his approval was some of my reward. His high standards taught me how to do excellent outcomes research and helped me build my reputation as an academic cardiothoracic surgeon. At the Cleveland Clinic, I had the opportunity to participate in leadership courses and became the program director for cardiothoracic surgery residency and later chief of cardiothoracic surgery. It was wonderful to work with such a talented group of surgeons. Everyone worked hard, and this pushed us all to contribute and succeed. The opportunity to be department chair at University Hospitals was a dream come true. It gave me the opportunity to use everything I'd learned as an academic surgeon and give back by recruiting, mentoring, and sponsoring our chiefs, faculties, and residents. I am indebted to Drs. Dan Simon and Cliff Megarian and Mr. Tom Zenti for giving me this opportunity. As a new chair from a different institution, I benefited tremendously from the mentorship I received from both Drs. Simon and Megarian. They were unselfish with their time, and their unwavering support was instrumental in helping recruit the outstanding faculty and division chiefs that we have added to the Department of Surgery over the last 7 years. I am extremely appreciative of the support of Mr. Zenti. During our monthly meetings, his mentoring was invaluable in my growth as a department chair. I will always be grateful for his support in nominating me to be the UH physician on the UH Board of Directors. I am most proud, however, of all that has been accomplished in the Department of Surgery at UH. Our faculty have made great strides in advancing UH's tripartite mission of to heal, to teach, and to discover. Under the leadership of Dr. Winter, the department's basic science research activities have grown tremendously. We now have nationally funded MD and PhD researchers and young surgeons who aspire to be surgeon scientists who are applying for and receiving research awards and grants. Under the leadership of Dr. Stein and Tao, UH Rises has been an unbridled success, quadrupling the number of publications and presentations written by our faculty and residents. One of the brightest moments for me during the pandemic was when our surgical residents did a clean sweep of all the research awards at the Cleveland Surgical Society Resident Research Competition. Dr. Anders is a leader in surgical innovations. He is an incredible example of an academic surgeon who has dedicated his career to alleviate debilitative diseases and injuries with his diaphragmatic pacing therapy that has recently received FDA approval. Under the leadership of Drs. Amori, Steinhagen, and Marks, our education programs are thriving. For the first time in 20 years, our surgical residency is fully accredited without citations, and our surgical clerkship is highly rated. We are attracting some of the best and brightest to our training programs. Our clinical programs are growing under the leadership of our division chiefs. We are performing more complex procedures with better and better outcomes. Dr. Mark Ader and Dick Ingersoll have built a database that allows our surgeons and quality leaders to evaluate surgical volume, quality, and financial data across the entire health system in near real time. Under the leaderships of Dr. Mark Pelletier, our cardiac surgeons are doing more complex and life-saving procedures with superb outcomes. Under Dr. Linden's leadership, our thoracic program routinely receives the highest ratings from the Society of Thoracic Surgeons. And our trauma program, under the leaderships of Drs. Moorman, Tinkoff, and Rushing, have built a trauma service throughout the health system anchored by a world-class Level 1 trauma unit at CMC. These are just a few examples of what is being accomplished in the Department of Surgery. However, with the team assembled, I have no doubt the best is yet to come. As a final reflection, I tried to find similarities between the chair's namesake and myself. Mr. Payne and I have had very different lives, but our lives are both enriched by the advice and guidance of others. The advice John D. Rockefeller gave Mr. Payne enriched his life. I have been enriched by the many mentors whose advice, education, and guidance have assisted me along my life and career. I cannot thank them enough. Without them, I would not be here today. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge the unwavering support and love of my family. I cannot imagine being on this journey without Ellen, my wife and best friend. my 2 children, Joe and Julia. They are amazing young adults, and it has been a gift to assist them on their journeys. I look forward to seeing where they both go. My goal in having the Oliver H. Payne Professorship in Surgery is to give back, to mentor, to sponsor, and to advise as many as I can to assist them so they may have as enjoyable a career as I have had as an academic surgeon. Thank you. I am truly honored.
Part 2. It is truly an honor and a privilege to participate with the Dean in acknowledging the accomplishments of our second illustrious physician and renowned academic leader, Dr. Robert Salata. Dr. Salata is the chair of the Department of Medicine, the physician-in-chief, and the Steris Chair of Excellence in Medicine at University Hospitals. He is also chair of the Department of Medicine, professor of medicine, international health and epidemiology and biostatistics, and the John H. Hord Professor at Case Western. I first met Dr. Salata in 2005 when he chaired the Division of Cardiovascular Medicine Search Committee for Dr. Rick Walsh. In fact, my very first person I met in Cleveland was when Dr. Salata walked into FIRE, where we were to have dinner with some of the search committee members. Over 5 visits to Cleveland, Bob convinced me of the once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to make real impact in my career. Boy, am I glad that I listened to you. His mentorship and friendship mean the world to me. Thus, having known Dr. Salata for 18 years, I feel that I can provide an accurate assessment of his qualifications for you today. Dr. Salata's passion, of course, is infectious disease and global health. He served as the chief of the Division of Infectious Disease and HIV Medicine for nearly 20 years at CWRU and University Hospitals Cleveland Medical Center. He is the founding director of the Infectious Diseases and Immunology Institute in the School of Medicine and served as the medical director of Infection Control and Prevention at UHCMC. Dr. Salata is the inaugural director of the UH Roe Green Center for Travel Medicine and Global Health. His clinical interests include the evaluation and management of infections in immunocompromised hosts and healthcare-associated infections. Dr. Salata has been a principal investigator on HIV/AIDS-related research studies for the Uganda CWRU Research Collaboration since 1997. His research interests include the epidemiology of infectious diseases, clinical trials of new therapeutic agents for emerging infections, and clinical HIV/AIDS research related to antiretrovirals, including those in resource-limited settings, as well as the epidemiology and prevention of HIV. Dr. Salata currently serves as one of 4 PIs, along with Dr. Stan Gerson, right now on a transformative NCI grant investigating lung cancer in East Africa and the relationship to HIV infection, characterizing lung cancer in artificial intelligent algorithms to aid in discerning pulmonary granulomatosis disease from lung cancer on radiological imaging. He has authored 293 peer-reviewed publications and 150 book chapters. He is internationally recognized as a researcher in clinical trials and has received continuous funding for these activities from the National Institutes of Health. Taking advantage of over 35 years of collaborations in Uganda, he also facilitated the involvement of multiple other areas of chronic non-communicable diseases in global health, including cardiovascular medicine, oncology, neurology, and genetics. And it was, of course, Dr. Salata's leadership that allowed me and a team to open the first cath lab in the country of Uganda and perform interventional procedures there. Above all, I am proud to say that Dr. Salata is indeed a master clinician. He is recognized as a consummate clinician and educator and has been recognized accordingly with the Department of Medicine Teacher of the Year Award as a Master Clinician Educator in the Department of Medicine, and as the inaugural recipient of the Master Clinician in Infectious Diseases at UH. And he has recently been recognized as a distinguished physician at university hospitals. Dr. Salata has been tapped for many national leadership positions as chair of the AIM Research Committee and vice chair of the APM Research Committee. He has served as a chair of the 3rd Consensus Conference on the Physician Scientist and a first author of a very important publication related to the U.S. physician scientist workforce. Dr. Salata's greatest impact, however, is now inexorably linked to the COVID-19 pandemic. Dubbed the Anthony Fauci of Cleveland, Dr. Salata was the infectious disease expert guiding university hospitals in many of Cleveland's COVID preparedness and response effort. He epitomized the mature and seasoned leadership, exuding calmness and confidence. Truth and science were the basis of his recommendations. Transparency and honesty, admitting what was known and unknown, were the hallmarks of his communications. It was truly an honor and privilege to serve as his moderator on nearly 50 Zooms with Bob for UH and many community organizations. Each Zoom required 10 hours of study by me and lots of PowerPoint slide making to even hope to keep up with Bob. We are honored to have Dr. Salata as a UH colleague, and I hope that you will join me in welcoming Dr. Salata and his family, his wife Jody, Chris and Christy, Mike and Kristen, and Andrew and Megan here tonight. Endowed positions represent prestige, leadership, and great responsibility for our distinguished shareholders. These perpetual funds, Bob, enhanced clinical discovery and medical education, both of which are essential to the future. I can think of no one more deserving of this honor investiture as the John H. Hord Chair than Dr. Salata. Bob, your work as an infectious disease clinician and global health researcher is saving lives every day. We applaud your dedication and are thrilled to celebrate this career milestone with you.
Thanks, everyone. And it's also an honor for me to be here and celebrate, along with Joe, who is a great colleague, as he mentioned. Two of the largest departments, that is medicine and surgery, work hand in hand. And I think that's a very important process that we go through to make UH and Case Western Reserve University all the much better. So I'm going to also take you through a little bit of a journey through my life. And I want to start by thanking President Kaler, Dean Gerson, and as mentioned, Dan, he and I share a NIH grant together. And really with HIV in place, the occurrence of cancers other than the traditional HIV-associated malignancies, such as lung cancer, are on the rise. And we're looking at this carefully in East Africa, both in Uganda and Tanzania, and lots to come in that regard. We're already finding that disease progression and mortality rates, death rates, are much higher in those that are HIV infected as opposed to those that are uninfected. We need to sort that out a little bit more. But this has been a great journey, and thanks, Stan, for that. I also want to thank Cliff McGarrion and Dan Simon. As Dan said, I was the chair of the search committee to bring him here initially, and it was great to recruit him. It took a little bit of arm twisting with 5 visits, but we made it, and we've never looked back. So with that in mind, I just wanted to look at the earliest years. I did graduate from the University of Notre Dame, there in pre-professional studies and a psychology major as well. And I had my first research during my senior year in parasitology and worm disease, actually, and that really spurred my interest in part in my ultimate career choice. I chose Case Western Reserve School of Medicine to come to because of their unique curriculum. And I was very fortunate because it was the only medical school I applied to. And I got in with early acceptance. But that was terrific. And that was where my interest in infectious disease was honed even further. My great example and mentor while a medical student was Dean Fred Robbins, a Nobel laureate who had worked on developing tissue culture systems that supported the growth of poliovirus. And in that respect, did lead to the first Salk vaccine being developed. He was awarded the Nobel Prize for that with 2 others. But my interest was piqued in global health, in part because of Fred. I decided to stay here in internal medicine under the guidance of Dr. Charles Carpenter, and he is still revered as a legacy in terms of what he accomplished here. Also Jerry Elner, who was my predecessor as Division Chief of Infectious Diseases, and of course Adil Mahmoud, who was mentioned before. Very prominent in geographic medicine or international health. I did research with Jerry Elner, and as a result, I had 2 publications, even as a resident. I decided to go for fellowship training elsewhere, and I ended up going to the University of Virginia in Charlottesville for a couple reasons. One is that it was a very preeminent infectious disease fellowship program. And furthermore, it was my opportunity to prove that the underpinnings of my knowledge base that I acquired both at the School of Medicine here and in my residency really served me well in another place, and it did. I actually decided to do a chief medical residency after fellowship training, and that was really what we did in those days. And so I came back to be the last chief resident under Dr. Carpenter. So we moved back to Cleveland after that stay in Charlottesville. Why did I choose infectious diseases? A number of reasons. In many respects, it allows you to remain very general in your approach. It does not restrict to any particular system or body part. In some ways, this gives us a surgical mentality because we can identify a particular problem and cure people of their affliction. And also at that time, there was a surge in emerging and re-emerging infections when I started training. 31 of the last 35 newly discovered diseases around the world are infectious diseases. And it actually allowed the application of significant technological advances beyond infectious diseases to many fields of medicine. That was very attractive. And then came HIV and AIDS, and everything changed, right? But now we could say at least that with appropriate therapy, people can live lives, and their life expectancy on medication is the same as anybody else in the community, as long as they continue to take them. So that was really an amazing journey to see that happen. So I did my fellowship at the University of Virginia. First year of my 3-year fellowship was in research. I was on a NIH training grant. And I had difficulties in choosing a mentor initially because it was brand new to me going to that institution. I chose to work with Jerry Mandel, who recently passed, who was highly respected in the field, and he was the division chief. and later with Jonathan Rabden, who spent time here in Cleveland at our VA institution. I was looking at a parasite called Entamoeba histolytica, but I also, at that time, was exposed to clinical research. And I wondered why Dr. Mandel pushed me to do that, but it really served me well subsequently in my years over time. I also, the other attraction for UVA was their global health expertise and interest, and that further honed my interest in that. I came back, as mentioned, to be a chief resident here. It was, in my view, in retrospect, the best decision of my life and really propelled me in my academic career. It was a way for me to bring it all back together after having spent 3 years in infectious diseases. And I was reunited with Dr. Carpenter, and as mentioned, I was his last chief resident. Even during my chief residency, I was doing research, clinical research, and published 2 papers related to that. I decided, after looking around, that I would ultimately stay here at UH and CWRU for a faculty position. I looked at other places and had opportunities, but in the end, this was the best decision for me and my family. Here are some of the mentors that have shaped my career. I mentioned already Dr. Frederick Robbins, former dean, Dr. Carpenter, CCJC as we called him, or the tall man, he was about 6'6". Adil Mahmood, charismatic, incredibly charming, and a great leader for us. Jerry Elner, who was my predecessor when I became the division chief of ID, and Jerry Mandel, who I've already mentioned, who was at the University of Virginia and just passed 2 months ago. In my early faculty years, I actually started in the Division of Geographic Medicine in 1985. My research focus again was on amoebiasis, which is a parasitic infection, but I also directed a monoclonal antibody facility. I had a 5/8 VA appointment, and I maintained a lab, however, at Case Western. I obtained merit funding, which is the equivalent of what is called an R fund from the NIH. And the draw of infectious diseases in clinical research and care was certainly foremost in my career in those early years. Because of that, I moved to infectious diseases in 1991 with increased clinical activities. My first trip to Africa actually was in 1992, and that was to Kenya for an international conference, and I was hooked. And I found, because of the situation and the topics in those days, that I was really focusing more and more of my efforts on HIV/AIDS, and became very involved in our work in Uganda, which we are now celebrating our 35th year. I did the very first AIDS vaccine trial on the continent of Africa as the PI, and have been involved thereafter in our HIV clinical research in our Africa site. I then became Associate Chief for Clinical Affairs and the Medical Director of Infection Control, as mentioned, in the Division of Infectious Diseases. I became Chief in 1996, and there served until 2015, and in the last 8 years, I was also Executive Vice Chair of the Department of Medicine. And I was Medical Director of Infection Control. I had secondary appointments, as Dan already mentioned, and I was asked when my predecessor left, Dr. Walsh, to become interim chair of the Department of Medicine in 2015. And there was a national search. I guess I was the last person standing. So I became chair officially as of 2016 and have never looked back. My research interest, Dan described much of this, but it includes HIV prevention, including vaccine work. We've not gotten there yet. We did a lot of work in HIV in women and had a cohort that we followed from the time that they were uninfected till when they became infected, both in Uganda, and Zimbabwe. We looked at antiretroviral resistance and clinical outcomes in Uganda, cardiovascular disease in Uganda, including rheumatic heart disease. Dan was involved in that as well. Healthcare-associated infections, immunocompromised hosts, and emerging infections have always been part of what I've done. I am the liaison investigator to our clinical trials unit, which is the #1 enrolling site in the world for clinical trials in HIV in Kampala, Uganda. I was also the PI of an NIH-supported unit for testing new drugs for emerging infections. I mentioned my involvement in the infectious disease clinical trials arena and have a clinical research center of my own. And we were, among other things, some of the first to look at the COVID vaccines, particularly the Pfizer vaccines. And now we've done, using the mRNA technology, we've now looked at influenza vaccine, most recently the respiratory syncytial virus vaccine. And we studied a vaccine from Pfizer that combines influenza and COVID. Look for that next season. So if I had to do it all over again, I would pursue additional training, particularly an MBA. My wife tells me this all the time, or an MPH or a PhD in public health because of where I ended up. I would probably also take a sabbatical to acquire new skill sets. Maybe not do a chief residency between fellowship training and starting my faculty position. I didn't mention it was that year that Dr. Carpenter left after I came back to be his chief resident. But in the end, I wouldn't change a damn thing. So a little about the John H. Hord Endowed Chair. He was the uncle also of Scott Inkley, who was a prominent pulmonary clinician and UH leader. It was first created in 1948 through his estate, and there have been several previous recipients, many of whom were mentioned before, latest of which was Richard Walsh, who I succeeded as chair. After a 2-year hiatus, this was reestablished in the Department of Medicine, and I thank all those that made that happen, including, of course, Dan Simon, Dean Gerson, Cliff McGarrian, among others. And what does this mean to me? So I'm very honored to hold this chair, for one. Secondly, it sets up a legacy for further chairs of medicine. And I think I couldn't ask more, being recognized academically for what I've accomplished, or for Joe, in that respect. And I think that's something that we want to leave behind. And of course, it always takes a village. And I just want to share some pictures of my family. I have 3 of my sons here today. And the first, my oldest son, is Chris, who's on your right side, with his family of 4 and his wife, Christy. They're both Notre Dame graduates like myself. The second family unit is Michael, who is here, his wife, Kristen, and their 4 boys. My son, Andrew, who's our tallest, 6'7". You could tell he's leaning over, and his wife, Megan, and their 2 boys. And lastly, my son, Matt, who resides in Phoenix, Arizona, and is part of the Phoenix Suns as a vice president, and his wife, Haley, and our latest addition, who is little Ryan, who's now about 18 months. But most of all, I want to recognize my wife, Jody. She's always been there to support me through thick and thin, through the early years. And I could tell you that initially, when we went from being a resident here in training, I took a pay cut to become an infectious disease fellow and made $13,000 a year. Just keep that in perspective. It was a different time, but she's been an inspiration to me all along and been incredibly supportive. And I couldn't have made this journey without her and the rest of my family and all the mentors and others that have supported me through the years. So thank you very much for this honor, and thanks for being here.
It's really my pleasure at this time to present Dr. Joseph Sabik and Dr. Robert Salata with their chairs as symbols of their respective professorships. As Dan mentioned, these professorships represent the foresight of some of Cleveland's earliest philanthropists, and gentlemen, you are now part of history, and we wish you some success in making them too. Now, the presentation of the chair itself is a highly complicated process. So gentlemen, if you'll walk over here, they're labeled. So this is the key thing. This is Joe. Joe, you're right here. Robert. First you stand in front of it. Together. And then you sit down. And now it's good. Please, Cliff and Dan, if you would come join us, and we'd love to have a ceremonial photograph to commemorate this terrific achievement by two of our great colleagues. There are, I think, 8 different ways. All right, very good. Stand.
So we've had a long and frankly pretty wonderful and memorable afternoon. Thank you all for joining us. We do have reception outside. I think this is a pretty incredible event, and I encourage you all to congratulate Joe and Bob for their accomplishments. We're certainly proud of them. Thank you.